Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another budget-friendly DIY video. We're kicking off the Patriotic Decor season, whether you're getting ready for Memorial Day or 4th of July. I like to do mine sometimes for the entire summer season. So let's get started with these budget-friendly DIYs.
To start out this project, we're going to need some letters. I am not sure where that tag is from, if I picked this up from Hobby Lobby on clearance last year, or if I just picked this up from the Dollar Tree. I honestly am not sure, but you can find these signs and you can also just pick up letters. Letters at Walmart or Hobby Lobby, they've got them. We're going to pull it off of this burlap ribbon, I guess you could say, and I'm just pulling out the staples. I am going to save this burlap ribbon, for lack of a better word, and can use that at some other point. We're going to sand this down. We got some glitter here, and we're going to sand that down. But then when I got to the S, I was like, oh, this paper just wants to peel off. So it came out pretty well, but either way, I sanded it down to peeled off paper where it would peel off. We're not going to make this perfect because we are going to cover it. So I'm putting a very thick coat of Mod Podge on each of these letters. It is a like MDF type of material, so it is really soaking it up. We're gonna do the iron-on method, so we're gonna let it dry. So I made sure to do a really thick coat because I didn't want it all to just soak into the material. So a thick coat of Mod Podge of any kind, and then let that dry. I picked up this paper from Hobby Lobby this year, and I'm going to just cut out pieces in the approximate size for each letter, and then we're going to iron that on. I'm just putting a piece of parchment paper, and I have my mini heat press from HTV Ront. These are very handy, but if you don't have one, you can use a household iron. I did that for a long time until I got this one, and just make sure you don't have any steam. And just go really slowly over it. Now this part is sped up. At first I showed you it in regular speed, making sure to cover the edges really good. And then we're going to trim this down a little bit, get off some of the excess with some scissors, and I'm getting into all of the nooks and crannies here. I'm going to show you how I do this. To get the clean edge, we're going to use sandpaper or a sanding block, but we're going to use a couple of different tools. So first, just sand away, sand down so that you're not pulling the paper up from the surface, and just go gentle. This is real speed here, so I just wanted to show you, like, we're not going to go crazy with it. And at times it might look like I'm going up and down, but I'm not. So in between here, I'm going in with an emery board. That helped. So it looks like I'm going back and forth, but I'm not. I am lifting up and just going down. Then lifting up, going down. And then for the little corner in the U, I went in with a piece of sandpaper and folded it. And with the A, I had to get really creative, but I didn't show you all of that. I'm just showing you it here. I just wanted to show you kind of how you go about doing that. You could also, if you have a really good sharp, like a cutting knife, maybe you could trim the edges there. But I just feel like the sandpaper, sanding it down is like my favorite method. I just had to get creative to get in all of the corners. And then I noticed that a couple spots in the edges, probably just from all of the pressure, came up again. So I just went back with, and I might have done it while it was still warm and that was part of it, but with the iron, and you can see it's all sealed down perfectly. And then I'm taking this sign. This was from the Dollar General, a Valentine's sign, $1. I know I paid less than that. I went and picked stuff up on clearance afterwards, so maybe 20 cents. Taking off the hanger, I'm using my heat gun to help take off the adhesive for the sticker. And then there's this weird like glitter spot like glued on that just happened probably, I don't know, when it was being manufactured. An error happened here. So I'm just going to sand that off. I sand down the spot where the label was a little bit and just smooth this out. We are going to use the back as our front. So I'm going to give this a coat of Waverly chalk paint in the color, I believe it's Snow White. And I'm doing a really good coat, but I'm okay if there is a little bit of edges shown of that MDF board because that just lends to the more rustic look, I guess you could say. So we're just going to get a good coat of that. And then once that was dry, I am going to just sand down the edges just a little bit. I sanded down the front to smooth it down, but that didn't really take off any paint. But I did want to bring out some of the edges a little bit. You can see I also painted over the edges just a touch. So I'm just trying to bring out a little bit of that MDF look. And for the front, I wanted to cover this really well. So the front is now the back. So I'm once again going in with a thick coat of Mod Podge. I wanted to do this before I attach stuff to the front because then it would be not like a flat surface. And once again, using the iron-on method, so I let the Mod Podge dry, and then I'm covering it. You can use craft paper. This is actually like the center of a wrapping paper roll, so it's a little bit stiffer and thicker, but I'm gonna get a really nice coverage here. It's gonna just look so completed and finished. There's one little spot where you can see the white sign come through that I didn't quite line it up right, but it's really not that noticeable. And then once again, using my sanding block to sand away and get the edges smoothed out there. So for some embellishment, I pulled out some beads. I'm just painting them with some brown paint on a wooden skewer. You see them spinning around. You can also throw them in a baggie with some paint. There's all sorts of ways to paint your beads. And this is how I'm doing it. And then I am wiping them down with a paper towel just because I wanted a little bit of it wiped off, but not like a ton. So it's mostly brown, but a little bit rougher looking. And then I'm going in with a stencil brush and just a little bit of paint, that same brown paint, and I'm highlighting mainly the edges of the sign, and then I'm going to wipe off, so there's a very, very little on my brush, and I'm just going across to make a few little streaks just to give it a little bit more of that rustic feel. Obviously, you don't need to do that if you don't want to. You could even make your beads a color if you want. You know, customize this to your own style. I'm going to go in with more of that brown paint around the edges of each letter. That just kind of helps make them stand out a little bit. And then on some of the grooves or the like cutouts on some of the letters, it's also going to kind of disguise. You can see here on the letter A, the little cutouts in the center were a little bit rough. It was very hard to sand that, but I made it happen. And it just kind of like cleans that all up and makes everything look purposeful. You know, if there's an error or a mistake, make it purposeful and nobody will ever know. So I like this highlighting the edges. I feel like it just helps it stand out a little bit. So we want to put our hanger. We're going to just use the original hanger back in on this sign. If you have a sign without holes in it, and you could either just glue some twine to the back or just make it a leaning sign with no hanger. But I'm just using a wooden skewer to punch through where the holes are. And then I went back and ironed on where those holes were a little bit because I didn't know if the paper had come away a touch when I was poking the hole through. So just to help it, you know, be a little bit more solid. And then I'm threading the beads onto our hanger and putting that back on. And then for the letters, we're just going to hot glue them. I lined them up and centered them. Sorry, my head always comes in the way here. I did push down quite a bit here because I wanted to make sure they had a full contact, and so I pushed down really hard and held it for just a little bit to let that hot glue settle. And I tried not to put glue on the edges so that I could shift the letter a little bit when I got it down to get it in place. But then anything that oozed out, I did go in with a little tool to just scrape out. You can use a skewer or something while it was still warm, so I didn't have to really scrape up the paint, but just get out any glue that oozed. But I just tried to not put too much towards the edge. Once again, my head's in the way and hitting the camera. And then I wanted to do one little bit of embellishment. So I have this ribbon from Hobby Lobby, and it's not double-sided. So I did the bunny ears, you know, tying your shoe with the bunny ears and flipping that out. And then the center is just blue, but I thought that looked really nice. And I'm just gonna, you know, pull on this until I get to the size I want. Here's what the ribbon looked like. It's from Hobby Lobby. I picked it up on clearance last year. But it's not bad at regular price either. And just going to trim that bow down. And I thought that was a nice little touch, but I really like how this sign comes out. Let me know what you think down below. For this DIY, I had 3 scrap pieces of wood. They are mostly the same length. They're not totally, but they're very close enough for a rustic DIY. So we're just going to sand this down. And I'm not really sanding it super thoroughly. I'm just trying to get any big rough edges off. And then I'm going to use this Gorilla Wood Glue. I was having a hard time getting it to come out the top. It's probably clogged. So I'm just going to kind of paint this on to our blocks. I really wanted a good adhesive here. And I'm just using like a wooden skewer to spread it out. And we're going to do a little bit of wood glue and a little bit of hot glue. You're supposed to not overlap them, the 2 glues. This is when I realized I thought I had plugged in my hot glue gun, but I hadn't. So I ended up wiping with a baby wipe off the glue while my glue gun heated up, and then I redid the whole thing. Squeeze that together, cleaned out any excess glue, and we're going to do that for all 3 pieces. And what I ended up doing was wrapping it with some painter's tape and then putting something heavy on top because I really didn't want them to separate. I wanted them to have a tight fit. And then we're going to go in with some Waverly chalk paint in the color white. We're going to give this whole thing, I think I just did one good coat. I don't think I did a second coat, but we're going to do the front, the side, the back. The end pieces, because they are where the wood is cut, you have to go a little bit heavier with the paint to get the coverage. And then once again, we have this ribbon from Hobby Lobby. We're going to make a little flag sign. And I thought this ribbon would be very cute for these stars. So I know this is not like accurate. This is, flag inspired. So I was kind of gauging where I wanted to do the blue with the stars and where I wanted to do my stripes. I ended up just cutting or measuring off each of my blocks in half for a stripe, and I put some painter's tape down and covered up the edges so that they would stay clean too. And I'm using Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson. I don't think I showed that to you, but we're going to just make our little stripes. And I did it as I went because my painter's tape, this would be easier if you have different lengths of tape to use as your spacer, but I only have the one size tape, so I just was kind of cutting it into pieces, and then I determined how far down my blue ribbon would go. If you don't have the blue ribbon, obviously you can just paint it blue, add on some white stars. But here are my pieces. I cut them all down. I only cut down the one edge, and I got that down really good so that it wouldn't fray. So you can see I'm putting some hot glue there. And then we're going to trim off the other side in a second. I really, really sped this up, and I apologize. My head kept getting in the way, but, I got to see what I'm doing. There's enough that you can see what I did. Then once I got them all down, I trimmed down the other edge, and my blocks were not exactly the same length, so I just did the best I could. And then I did put some Mod Podge on that end of the ribbon because I was afraid it was going to fray. And then once everything was dry, I went in with some antique wax and a stencil brush, took a lot of the, not much antique wax on my brush, went over, including the ribbon, and just kind of wanted to dull everything down, make it look a little bit more old and weathered. And I do really like how that came out. And now I have this burlap ribbon from a USA sign that I showed you earlier. And I thought this could be a nice little accent piece. So I'm using my mini iron to straighten it out because it had a lot of twists and turns in it. And I'm putting it in between parchment paper. I don't know if it was necessary, but I didn't want to risk anything getting on my iron. So I am fraying the edges and just trying to get it down to where I need it to be. And we're going to put this all the way around the sign of the flag piece. I didn't do the bottom. I think my sign still would have laid okay flat because it's not very thick. But just to be sure, I didn't put it on the bottom. And I'm using a little silicone spatula from the Dollar Tree to press this down because obviously it's going to come right through. It's a little bit more frayed on one side. I wanted it to look rough and rustic. So we're going to do that all the way around 3 sides. And then I do trim the edges. I'm not making it perfect. I wanted it to hang over the edges a little bit, but not too much. Anyways, this was very simple little touch to add to this. And I really like how this little sign came out. But so yeah, give it a little bit of a trim and a haircut. And I really like this sign. It's small enough to be on a tier tray, but big enough to just use as a shelf sitter as well. Let me know what you think. For this next DIY, I have one of these flower pots. They're like a seed starting. They're like a natural material. You can actually use them to plant in. I picked these up in a pack from Walmart, but then I have seen them at Dollar Tree as well. And I use them for another project that you can look back on my outdoor DIY video. And I made a wreath with them, but I had a few left over. So we're going to tape off the top, and I'm using Ocean from Waverly chalk paint and putting a good coat here. I just did one coat, and I needed to do this whole thing in phases because I needed the paint to dry. So then I taped off where the blue was and made some stripes. Now, with the angle of the pot, these stripes are not even. They're not all of the same. This is definitely more rustic. And I'm just going in with an acrylic paint here. So this just goes to show you can use acrylic or chalk paint. And this material will absorb it. So it's not going to have a super, super crisp line, okay? It's going to bleed over just a little bit. We're going to go ahead and do some red stripes, but while my white paint was drying so that I could tape them off, I'm going to use a stencil from Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to paint on some little white stars. I'm doing some over what will be the red stripes, and then I went back in and used a smaller star, showing just wiping it off with a baby wipe, and going to do a smaller star on the white stripe spot. You can, do this anyway. This is just inspiration, right? So these pots are really, really cute, very inexpensive. They're lightweight. You could do this though with like a terracotta pot if you wanted. And then I taped off where I wanted to paint my red stripes. And I did use this opportunity to kind of space them out a little bit more because I knew the red would cover the white pretty good. But once again, this material will absorb the paint, and so it does kind of spread a little bit. So this isn't going to be perfect. It definitely looks a little bit more rustic, but I really like how this came out. And it wasn't hard to do. The painting wasn't long. It took a little bit of time to let everything dry and tape it off again. And then here I just did go in with a small paintbrush and just cleaned up some of the edges, but I didn't go nuts with it because, like I said, it can't really be perfect due to the nature of this material. So I embraced that, but I did clean up, with a little paintbrush, some of the bad spots that were pretty bad. And then I went in with, once again, with some antique wax, just a little bit. I didn't go too heavy on it, and just wanted to make this look like an older pot that had seen a little bit of life. This pot had experienced some things. And then I wanted to do one little extra touch of some twine around the top, and I took my time with this. This is a thin twine, so I touched it down and then used something to kind of pull up any extra glue that was hanging out while it was still warm, and that made it a little bit easier to get the hot glue up. So just took my time with this, but I only went one time around, but you could easily do the whole top rim if you want. Lots of different ways to do this. And then that was all I did for this DIY. I just put in some boxwood scraps that I had, and I really love how this pot came out. Once again, small enough for a tiered tray, but also big enough to kind of be a filler piece on a shelf.
All right, well, that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing before you leave so you don't miss out on my future videos, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.